So my rights end where your rights begin. I cannot punch you because my right to swing my arm ends where your body begins. This is a fundamental principle, and any time a right comes into conflict with another person's right, that right is not a right. So if I'm using my property to harm your life, I have no right to use my property in that way. The only ways that we can limit rights are 1, with consent, and 2, my rights end where yours begin. Anything beyond those limitations is an immoral violation. Thank you. I now stand ready for any questions that Augustin may have.
All right, this cross-examination will be 3 minutes long.
Yes.
And if my judge is ready? And Timmy?
Yes.
All right, I'll go ahead and get started. Can you agree that we're best friends?
I can probably agree to that.
Okay, wouldn't you agree with me that I'm the more attractive out of the two of us?
I'm sorry, but I cannot agree to that. Unless you provide some sort of evidence, then I cannot agree.
Okay, I don't think your source is valid. I'll go ahead and possibly address that later. Now, next, I have a few more questions for you. You can agree to a government actor in this situation, correct?
I do not see any reason not to.
Okay, awesome. And you can agree that it is, of course, the government's duty to protect rights, correct?
Fundamentally, that was what the government was created to do.
All right, and certain rights should be limited, correct?
Only within the limitations that I provided in the end of my speech.
Absolutely. So should we pay taxes?
Yes, because we have consented to paying taxes by living in the country.
So you're saying the only reason we should pay taxes is only because we consent?
Yes, that is the reason we pay taxes.
If I don't consent to paying taxes and the government puts me in jail for tax evasion, should I still have paid that as taxes, or was I justified for not paying taxes because I didn't consent to it?
No, when you live in a country, you are consenting to their laws in order to gain benefits from that country. If
Okay.
you are gaining benefits
Do I have
from
the
that
choice
country,
not to live in a country though?
yes,
Okay, how do I do that?
buy a yacht, go out into the ocean.
So you're saying that the only other option I have is to either live in a country or go out in the yacht and live in the ocean. That is what you are saying.
No, I'm sure there are other places that you can move to.
Would you be able to provide? Because we live in a world where there is land taken up by countries absolutely everywhere.
I can think of a few. There's Kiribati, which is an island in the Pacific Ocean. There's the Bikini Atoll, which has been abandoned for many years. And there are many other islands out in the Pacific.
Alright, so you're basically saying that I either have the choice to live in a society that functions or to live on a desert island where I will probably die, correct?
No, fundamentally, when you are consenting to gain benefits from a society, you must be willing to take recompense.
I have a question. Did you choose to be born in the United States?
No, but I can choose to move.
Okay, what if I chose to be, what if I wanted to have been born in another island? I didn't consent to these laws in the country.
Alright, but do you pay taxes when you're under 18 unless you work, if you don't work?
Well, I do work, so I do pay taxes.
Alright, but when you're working, you are consenting to the laws of the country. You
Well,
are
that
agreeing
doesn't
that you
mean-
want to participate and be a functioning member of
Yes,
society.
but again, then I did not consent to this. But can you just agree with me that it is not necessarily realistic to say that I can just leave a society and go to a place where there is no society? That is not necessarily a realistic option.
No, but fundamentally, if you agree to participate in society, be a functioning member of that society, and gain the benefits of that society, you must be willing to consent to its laws.
By being alive in that society, correct?
No, by being a participating member in that society and gaining the benefits from it.
Okay, sure. I'll address that a little later, but you can't agree we pay taxes, correct?
Yes, we do pay
Okay,
taxes
awesome.
because of consent.
So, if I was to trade something, would that mean that I am trading with value? Meaning that I make a trade for something, I buy something at the store, that means I am equating value, or at least valuing something more than the thing I'm trading for.
Most likely.
Okay, awesome. So, you can agree that the government does make laws. Is it okay for some of these laws to be restrictive?
And restrictive how?
Well, to restrict certain rights for a certain purpose.
They cannot restrict past the natural limitations.
Okay, awesome. I have no further questions. Alright, this speech is going to be 7 minutes long. Just confirm. And if all my judges are ready? And Timothy?
Yes.
Alright, I will go ahead and get started. The year 2008 is famous for its severe economic downturn known as the Great Recession. And although I was clueless to the idea of an economy even existing at the time, my father was stressed out trying to figure out how he was going to provide for my family. This was the situation for many families across the globe. However, making money wasn't the only issue. An increase in many theft crimes naturally came alongside the economic downturn. In other words, with a failing economy, individuals' rights were put in danger. It's because prioritizing the economic interests of the community ultimately protects rights that I stand opposed to this year's resolution. The individual right to property ought not be valued above the economic interests of the community. Now, as for definitions, I can go ahead and agree to all of Timothy's definitions, and even for the value, I can agree to his value, that of human rights. I believe the value should be rights in this debate round. So just to be clear, whichever side best achieves rights and the protections thereof should win this round. Now, my first contention you can write down as sustaining the economy protects rights. Sustaining the economy protects rights. And I have a subpoint under this I would like you to tag as a healthy economy has less crime. A healthy economy has less crime. The United Nations Office on Drug and Crime issued a study monitoring the impact economic crisis had on crime in several different countries. In the conclusion of its study data, the UNODC said, quote, "The ARIMA results indicate clearly that at both a country and city level, economic factors likely play a role in describing the evolution of specific crime series," end quote. What this means is that an economic downturn correlates with an increase in crime rate. Any negative change in an economy can cause crime rates to increase. Now, we've established that healthy economies mean that there are less crime. If we have a good economy, we're going to have less crime. If we have a bad economy, we're going to have more crime. But how does this relate to your rights? Well, my second subpoint you can tag as less crime means safer rights. Less crime means safer rights. If there is crime in a society, what does that mean? It means by the definition of crime, rights are being violated. In turn, if we protect the economy and we lower the crime rate, then we are thus protecting people's rights by there being less violation through crime rates, making them safer. My second contention you can write down as limiting the right to property sustains the economy. Limiting the right to property sustains the economy. In order to sustain the economy, we must limit the individual's right to property, but not without limits. It is not my contention that we should ignore the individual right to property or obliterate it at every opportunity to help grow the economy, but only to restrict when necessary to uphold the economy. My subpoint under this, taxes are necessary to sustain the economy. Taxes are necessary to sustain the economy. We all pay taxes, and I'm sure that you agree that we should pay at least some taxes. These taxes are restrictions on your right to property, but why are they justified? Taxes are justified for two reasons. Firstly, they are justified because they fund government operations that protect our rights, such as the police force and the justice system. But secondly, taxes are justified because they fund government operations that sustain the economy. Remember, a healthy economy means safer rights. Restricting the right to property for the sake of the economic interests of the community, primarily through taxes, causes our rights to be safer and more protected. My third and final contention you can write down as limiting the right to property protects rights. Limiting the right to property protects rights. Now, listen, trust me, I know this contention may sound a little bit counterintuitive, but it is absolutely true. In fact, if you look back at your flow, you will see a flawless logical syllogism that proves so. Limiting the right to property for the sake of the economic interest of the community does two things. It funds government operations that protect rights, and it sustains a healthy economy, which reduces the crime rates and makes everybody's rights safer. Now, with my remaining time, I'm going to address the arguments that my opponent brought up in his last speech. Starting with his first contention, which was to protect rights, you can tag two responses to this. My first response is negative protect. Negative protect. Now, my entire case is based around the fact that the negative protects rights, but how does it do this? It does so by limiting your right to property. My opponent even agreed with me in cross-examination that we should have taxes. And this is the means by which we limit the right to property. We limit the right to property over the for the economic interest of the community by taking some money from people, or rather their property, to help grow the economy. That is valuing the economy over it. But this also protects rights, again, by lowering the crime rate and funding government operations that sustain the economy, as well as funding the police force and the justice system. My second point under this, you can tag as AF fails. AF failed. And yes, I am saying that AF, the side that says right to property, does fail in the protection of rights. But why? Well, in the situation in which the individual right to property conflicts with the economic interest of the community, the affirmative side would say that we prioritize those rights. And in this case, guess what that means? It means that we can't limit your right to property. We can't limit your right to property under the affirmative side. Because by limiting your right to property, we are inherently devaluing it. When I make a trade, and as my opponent even agreed, we are exchanging value, saying the thing for which I am trading for is more valuable than the thing I am losing. This is the situation with taxes. When you pay taxes, you are inherently saying, my right to property, which I am giving up through my money, is less valuable than the economy. This is inconsistent with the affirmative side, and thus we wouldn't be able to have these necessary limitations that fund government operations, again, that help our economy reduce the crime rate and protect our rights. My opponent's second contention was collectivism harms rights. You can tag my response as negative protects all rights. Negative protects all rights. Now I have a few subpoints out of this. My first one, you can say all must be limited. All must be limited. My contention is not that we limit one individual's rights so that the rest of the community can benefit from it. No, what I'm saying is that in a community, everyone's rights are limited to a certain extent. Again, all of us pay taxes so that all can benefit from it, which is my second subpoint. All protected. All protected. Everyone's right to property is limited under the economic interests of the community because in turn everybody's rights, including the people whose rights are being limited, are protected. And thus this is not an example of collectivism. My opponent also brought up, he said limitation versus violation, and basically said that a violation is absolutely immoral and a limitation is done when it is harming someone else's rights. And I agree with this. You can tag my response as negative limit, not violate. Again, the negative only limits rights. It does not violate it. That would not be profitable whatsoever. And I want to bring up one final point. Again, my opponent agreed that we have taxes, and inherently by paying these taxes, we are valuing the economic interests of the community over our individual rights to property. Thank you. I'm now so ready for conversation.
All right. I have my timer at 3 minutes.
Yes.
So if my judges are all ready, and Augustine?
Yes, I am.
All right, then we can begin. You would agree with me that that is a very nice tie, correct?
Oh, I would agree, yes.
And would you agree that whoever bought that tie deserves to win the round today?
No, I would not.
All right, thank
Because
you.
that is you.
I'll address that later.
Okay.
Okay, you would agree with me that every person is born with the same amount of rights, correct?
Yes.
So every person has equal value from birth.
Sure.
All right, next you would agree that there has to be some sort of natural limitation on rights, right?
Well, there's a natural limitation in the sense that you're right, it cannot violate other people's rights, but there has to be someone to enforce
Yes.
that limitation.
All right. Next, you would agree with me that victim blaming is wrong, correct?
What do you exactly mean by that?
The idea of if I walked into my friend's house and he told me that he just got robbed the other day, and then I said, well, it's your fault for not attacking the robber, that would be an incorrect stance, correct?
Sure, I would say so.
So the robber is responsible for his own actions.
Of course.
All right, thank you. Next, are you aware of the trolley morality problem?
Yes.
All right, so if there were 5 people tied to a train track, and there was a trolley heading towards them, and then there was a perfectly innocent, larger in weight man standing next to me, would it be right for me to push that man in front of the trolley in order to stop the train?
Absolutely not.
All right, thank you. Next, you would agree with me that ought implies a moral imperative, correct?
Sure.
All right, and you would agree with me that morality is universal.
Yes, I would agree that.
So it doesn't just apply in the home or at church, it applies in all aspects
Yes,
of life.
morality does apply everywhere.
All right, thank you. No further questions. I will address my opponent's case in 2 main arguments. The first of which you can tag as immoral. Immoral. Augustine agreed with me in cross-examination that the word ought implies a moral obligation. And we can see this word in the resolution, which means not only do we have to be participating in supporting our grounds, but we also must be supporting morality in the way we do so. Whereas Augustine fails in this aspect. This is in response to his first contention, his third contention, and his idea that the neg side limits rights. And you can tag simply as the trolley problem. The trolley problem. Augustine is trying to limit rights or protect rights by violating rights. This is not how it works. Think of it as the trolley problem. The reason I cannot push a man in front of the train in order to stop it from running over 5 people is because I cannot sacrifice one person's rights for the sake of others. Augustine agreed with me that that is immoral. The same thing applies in the resolution today. I cannot sacrifice one person's rights and limit those for the sake of everyone else's. Now, I'm sure you all would agree with me that shootings are bad. Gun violence is bad and it kills a lot of people. What Augustine would say in response to that is instead to stop gun violence, we should cut off every person's hands. That way, we would have no gun violence, and the protection of every person would be protected. Of course, more people's lives might be saved, but that is an unjust way of achieving that. You cannot achieve a good end by immoral means. The ends do not justify the means. Just because Augustine is trying to uphold and protect more rights, he cannot do it through immoral means, which is why his case is flawed. He said that sustaining the economy protects all rights, and he brought up the example of crime. However, you can address this as victim blaming. He is fundamentally saying the issue that comes from protecting rights is more crime will happen. So in order to prevent this, he punishes those whose rights should be protected. He says, it is your fault, because your rights are intact, that we have this crime. So in order to protect all these other people, it is your fault, and we will restrict your rights, even though they did nothing wrong, and they do not deserve an unjust limitation. You cannot limit for unjust reasons. My second point you can tag as consent by participation. Consent by participation. And this is in response to his second contention, and that of taxes. Quite simply, when we are in a society, we gain benefits from that society. In order to gain those benefits and to participate in society, we fundamentally must be willing to consent to governmental laws to some extent. And this one area of governmental laws we must consent to is that of taxes. Taxes are not a violation of rights. They are justified under the affirmative side. If you agree with me that taxes may be important to our economy, then that side is a bipartisan issue. We both agree that taxes are important, and it is not an unjust violation. Next, my opponent addressed a couple of my points. He said that the negative protects rights. However, I already addressed this, where the negative protects rights by immoral means, which is wrong. And then he said the AF fails to protect rights. However, protection is inherent into the affirmative side. You cannot protect rights by immoral means, so instead we must do the best of our moral capability to protect rights, which the affirmative does. We are protecting rights through moral means. And even though you may say we are protecting less rights overall, we are doing it in a legal and moral and justified way, which is why the affirmative achieves it better. His final one was, we cannot limit rights. My response to this is, yes, we can. Or that the affirmative side does not limit rights. And the simple response is, yes, we do. We limit rights with consent and with the natural limitations. If my natural rights are harming your natural rights, then fundamentally, that is not my right. I do not have a right to hurt other people. And also, you must be able to consent to your rights being limited. Because my opponent's case is unjust and unfair, it should lose the rest of it. Thank you.
6 minutes long. And if all my judges are ready? And Timothy?
Yes.
Alright, I will go ahead and get started. In this last speech, I will respond to my opponent's arguments as well as propose 4 voting issues as to why I believe a negative ballot is absolutely warranted in today's debate round. Starting with my opponent's point, which was immoral. You can tag my response as value not replace. Value not replace. My opponent brought up the trolley problem and said that it is applicable to this resolution simply because the negative side is saying we are devaluing someone's right, or rather getting rid of someone's rights so the rest of the community's rights can prosper. But this is not the negative position at all. You can tag my subpoint under this as limit not violation. Limit not violation. For my opponent's idea of collectivism, or the trolley problem, to apply to the negative side, it would have to erase rights completely, or completely violate rights. But my opponent not only has applied this incorrectly, but has not provided a reason to even believe that the negative does violate rights. He has only said that the limitations the negative says doesn't apply to it. He hasn't even proven that the negative violates rights. So this example simply is not applicable, and the negative is moral because it does not erase rights for the community. It simply limits rights for everybody. Now, my opponent also said that the economy, responding to my point of the economy protect them all, he said victim blaming. And you can tag my response as does not punish. Does not punish. He's saying that you are punishing the people who are innocent for the crimes of those who are guilty. However, this is simply not true, and the reason is that it falls back to his idea that the negative side violates rights. But it doesn't. The negative does not violate rights. Again, my opponent's idea is that the negative is collectivism. The negative is not collectivism. That is very important to understand. Why? Because collectivism is completely ignoring the rights of one person so that the rest of the people, just because it's greater in number, can flourish. The negative side is saying we limit the right to property of everyone under the economic interest of the community so that everyone, including the people whose rights are being limited, can prosper from that and have their rights protected. Or if you want to write this down in 3 simple words, you can just say benefit of all. It benefits everyone. Now, my opponent said that there is consent by participation, Specifically regarding taxes that it doesn't apply, you can tag my response as in community. Now, if you look back at the resolution, it says we are in a community. The individual right to property ought to be valued above the economic interest of the community. And I'm assuming that every single person here was born in a community and not as a desert island. Now let me ask you a question. Do you want to move to a desert island in a remote location without society? Of course not. It is simply not a viable option. And this is the only other option that my opponent provides for consenting to taxes. He's saying the only reason taxes are justified is because you consent to it. But judges, you don't have a choice to consent to taxes. Again, if you don't pay your taxes, what happens? You will get arrested and put in jail for tax evasion. That doesn't sound like consent at all. If you try to go move to a desert island, chances are, realistically, you are going to starve to death and you won't be able to sustain yourself at all. Now, my opponent, responding to my examples of the negative protecting and the affirmative failing, said that the affirmative does the best to do what is moral. And he went back to this idea that the affirmative side is doing the moral job here by not violating people's rights. But again, the negative is moral because it does not violate people's rights. This is something I'll address a little bit more in my voting issues. But my opponent also brought up another argument saying that the affirmative doesn't limit. When I said the affirmative doesn't limit, and he said yes. And again, he had the point of consent. And this is a very important point to note. I have a few more responses I'd like to reiterate to this. You can tag my one overarching response as not an option. Not an option. And I have three main applications for this. Firstly, is a desert island. Like I said before, you can't just go move to a desert island. It's not a viable option. Second is the community. The resolution says we are already in a community. We didn't consent to being in that community. We are in that community. And the third point is tax evasion. You are going to get arrested if you don't consent to taxes. But nevertheless, that is justified. Why? Because we as society have agreed that taxes, we have to have at least some, not over taxes of course, but we have to have some taxes to limit your right to property for the economic interest of the community so everyone can benefit from that. And if you don't consent to it, you are going to have your rights limited anyway in prison. Now my first voting issue you can tag as human rights, and this is just another reminder of the value in this debate while we are both trying to achieve human rights. The second voting issue you can tag as taxes justified by the economy. Taxes justified by the economy. And remember, taxes are an example of your right to property being limited under the economic interest of the community. But again, why is it justified? Going back to the original point in my case, the economy being benefited, and my opponent did not even disagree with this, does help rights. It does protect rights when the economy is upheld. Therefore, taxes are justified because by limiting your rights for the economy, all rights as a whole concept for everyone in the community are protected. The police force, justice system, and lower crime rate, rights being violated less. My third voting issue, you can tag as neg doesn't violate. Again, neg doesn't violate. Throughout this debate round, Timothy has been talking about situations, basically trying to convince you that the affirmative side allows for limitations, and the negative side, well, limitation simply isn't applicable, but he hasn't given any form of proof or even argumentation to prove why the negative violates rights. He has simply said that, or accused the negative of violating rights, not showing actually how it does. And remember, the negative limits rights. That is the valuing over part of the resolution, is the limitation, not a violation. My fourth and final voting issue you can tag as protecting. Again, protecting. Remember, we are protecting rights here, and my opponent even agreed, is the government's duty to protect rights. And as I have proved, the affirmative fails at the idea of protecting rights because it does not allow for the necessary limitations on those rights to protect rights, and the negative upholds the protection of these human rights by limiting the right to property specifically when it is necessary. Thank you so much for your time.
Alright, I have my timer set for 3 minutes.
Yes.
So if my judges are all ready, and Augustine?
Say it.
Alright, then I can begin. You can tag my first response to Augustine's case as cannot limit for economy. Cannot limit for economy. I established what the limitations on rights were at the very beginning of the speech. The only time you can limit rights are the natural limitation, which is my right ends, or yours begin, and the limitation of consent. Anything that falls outside of this is a violation, which is how I have proved that Augustine's side violates rights, because fundamentally he is not limiting for one of those two reasons. He is limiting in order to protect the economy. The economy is not a valid reason for limitation, as I proved in my first speech. The second thing I would like to address is collectivism. Anytime Augustine has tried to address this argument of collectivism, he said that this is simply not a case of collectivism. So let me propose another hypothetical to you. Let's say I push that larger man in front of the trolley to stop the train. The man doesn't die, but instead is severely injured. Now, I did not destroy his right. Instead, I merely limited his right to mobility and limited his right to life a little bit. That's a limitation of rights, correct? And that's collectivism, though. You see, collectivism doesn't require an entire revoking of rights. Collectivism inherently is the idea of taking one person's rights or limiting one person's rights for the sake of another, which is immoral to do, as I demonstrated with my examples. The next one is, Augustine said that we are doing it for the benefit of all, for the benefit of all. And let me tell you this, if we cut off every single person's hands, it would benefit everyone by not allowing them to get shot by guns. It would benefit them. It's a benefit for everybody. But it's also at a disadvantage. It's at a cost. Just because you are benefiting people doesn't justify the cost. The ends do not justify the means. If the cost isn't worth it, then why would you spend for it? The next one is in response to every argument where he said taxes. And you can tag my response to this as consent by participation. And let me give you a couple of examples. Who pays taxes? Adults, participants in society, people who actively are contributing to the community. Does a child pay taxes? No, unless you're participating in community by having a job. If there was a lazy man who sits in his room all day, doesn't buy anything, doesn't have a job, would he pay taxes? No. Would he get sent to jail for paying taxes? No, because he has no duty to pay taxes because he is not participating in society. We tax when they participate. Consent by participation, which is why taxes is a nonpartisan issue. And then finally, I would like to bring up my two voting issues. The first one is morality. Fundamentally, both sides are trying to uphold rights. However, Augustine's side is doing it by immoral means, and by limiting rights for unjustified reasons in order to participate and promote the economy, which is an unjustified reason. And then my second voting issue is the tie. I established in the cross-examination that Augustine's tie is wonderful, and whoever bought that tie deserves to win the round today. And since I bought that tie, my side deserves to win the debate. Thank you. And I thank you all so much for taking the time to judge.
Thank you all so much for taking the time to judge, especially this late hour.